Hello, 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 and welcome to the Anti-Racist Enneagram Podcast with Jessica Denise Dixon, where we look at life and healing at the intersections of the Enneagram, anti-racism, and embodiment for personal and collective liberation. Let's go.
Not trying to get by. Trying to get by. I'm trying to get free. Trying to get free.
So this episode, we are talking consent, everyone's favorite topic. And by everyone's favorite, I mean, I get the most pushback about this topic when I post. People freak out. Let's talk consent, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Consent, I believe, is just an important part of human flourishing. I think having an ethic of consent is absolutely beautiful. And I think it's an important aspect of a commitment to anti-racism and a commitment to liberation. So let's talk about some of the things that, let's talk about some of the realizations I had. I'll say it that way. As I was processing through some of the pushback maybe a few weeks ago, I realized that people have a very high view of themselves. What I mean is that people have a sense that they're reading the room really, really accurately. And that ain't necessarily so. So, talking more about culture, right? The polychronic high context cultures that actually value proximity with one another, that value interconnectedness, they have a bigger value for reading body language and other context or intention cues. So when the mood changes, if you're not the one reading the room, they're like, what's up with that? Like, you're kind of the odd one out. Your job is to find what has changed and to be able to understand what's next because of that. Now, you might live concurrently in your body in a culture that is a little bit polychronic. Our dominant culture is monochronic. It's a low context culture shaped by capitalism. And we're compartmentalized and siloed and disembodied in ways that have reshaped our relationship with one another. So the reality here that I see is like, yo, you don't know someone's world enough to just go ahead and give them advice or to do something for them without asking. Consent in its basic definition is like waiting for some kind of affirmative response. And if you don't have that yes, how do you really know that you're reading things correctly? People not telling you that you're not reading things correctly is not the same as knowing that you're reading it right. And I think that this is really, really important. This is really, really crucial. I have people try to just offer me advice without making an offering. They just give me it. They throw their advice at me. And my question often is, why would I ask you that? Like, because often it's unsolicited, this advice that they're trying to give me. And it might come from something that I just said, this is what I'm dealing with. And they just offer advice. Like, why do I want advice from you? Do you not think that I would actually go to someone that I was looking for advice from, like an expert or someone who I know knows about that? If I didn't ask you, you assuming that I would want that from you is a little bit prideful. It just is a little bit prideful. And what we want to do is adopt an ethic of consent, knowing that consent is something that leads to more connection. pausing to check in with someone is only a problem when your whole sense of self, all of your self-esteem is wrapped up in being able to offer something to someone instead of offering yourself to someone. The reason that I have such a strong sense of this, even within my friendships, in my business, working with clients, is because I want us all to show up and to just be loved for who we are instead of what we have to offer. I don't want my friends to ever think that I'm in a relationship with them because I need their advice. And if you're in a ton of relationships in which people always need your advice, I just want to say that that might be on you. That might be something that you've chosen for yourself. And hey, I may have some judgments around that, but like you do you, boo. But I don't want that kind of obligation or responsibility. That's not my thing at all. So choosing consent means that we get to choose how we're being related to one another. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things, especially in a culture that is so disconnected, especially in that kind of culture. It makes sense that we would slow down and check in. Because with consent, we can make some assumptions. Maybe we read body language and we think, oh, that was what so and so did, so this is what this means. Or we read body language and we're like, oh, this looks like this mood. And we might be correct, but we don't know unless we check in. There's no way for us to know. And in such a disembodied culture, unless you're really doing work around your own nervous system, around your own emotional intelligence, if you are not doing that work, you are not primed to read others correctly outside of just a simple trauma response. Plenty of people have learned to read other people really, really well because they had to in order to survive. But we're not always navigating trauma responses, and then it just becomes a habit and a pattern. And it becomes the way of relating to everyone. This is why our healing work is so important. It's so, so important. You know, um, we each have our own hangups potentially around consent. But I think there's a few things that it's important to look at. One is, how does hierarchy shape our ideas and our ideals of consent? You know, if we are a supervisor of someone, if we are a parent of a child, whether they are actually the age of a child or an adult child, there's this idea that I don't need consent sometimes in those roles. So we have to look at, how have we been shaped by hierarchy? What does that mean? How does that show up for us? Another thing is, within dominant culture, within a culture of whiteness, one of the aspects of that culture is niceness, where there is a sense of, we're going to show up in a way that's the most socially acceptable, that's, where we don't ruffle feathers and we talk around things that are hard. We don't necessarily go in fully. Niceness is going to shape our ideas around consent. Some people have like an idea like, well, it might be rude to say anything at all. So they might actually have something that's really helpful and not even offer it, not even say, hey, can I share this with you? Other people might think that being nice is overgiving and just jumping in to help without even pausing. So, we have to look at what that is for us. We are responsible for that. We are responsible, and then of course we have our Enneagram types. So types 3, 7, and 8s. They are always moving forward. They don't want to be slowed down often with this whole idea of consent. 8s will push past even reasonable, like healthy barriers They feel like sometimes people should like maybe just be all in and trust them. They don't want to slow down. But they need to practice attunement. They need to practice like, am I being present to what that person wants? Or am I being present to what I think that they should want? For threes, there is this like, if we slow down, it's not gonna be as efficient. So let's just keep moving. When what's really important is being related to one another. How are people feeling seen and felt by me? For sevens, there can be a rush toward the future and to get out of the present pain, which, the type 7 has this beautiful, beautiful, I think it's a superpower when it's healthy, way of being able to point us toward a beautiful, happy future, but not when they're disconnected from the fact that they're pushing us forward because they're uncomfortable, because they don't like pain. They're afraid of being caught in our pain or in their own pain because we are expressing some kind of pain. And so they often will just kind of jump in without asking consent. They'll just start to offer solutions. And, ones, twos, sixes are in another triad, and they really are wanting to be helpful. Ones, they can have a shaky relationship with consent because often they feel like they're always offering advice and people either don't listen to them or people say like, no, thanks, I'm going to pass. And that can feel really frustrating because ones feel like they know it all. So it might be tempting to just bypass and just tell people what to do. For twos, there is this sense that I am lovable if I help. If I am helpful, then that is how I gain love. So they'll just jump in. They'll jump in and not necessarily slow down enough to say, hey, is this okay? Because for twos, rejection can often feel, or that no can feel like a personal rejection, and it's not necessarily. Someone saying no doesn't mean that you are unlovable, but that's how the two can feel sometimes. And it makes it a sensitive thing for them to ask. So often they just kind of jump into what they believe needs to happen. For sixes, another thing that's really tricky, sixes can have this weird relationship with themselves around their own agency. So they can often like jump into like asking other people or almost like idealizing other people as like their guru or as like their expert that they follow, that they're really committed to, without even seeing like, how is this person related to me? Do they want that role? But then another thing with the six is often there's, kind of some worst case scenario things that happen, and they'll often share that without any kind of consent because they want people to be safe. Sixes want us to be safe. And so they offer what might make us unsafe without checking in and seeing like, is that where we are in the process? And is that what the best thing is for now? And often because of that, people can, see sixes as being over dramatic or catastrophizing, or always focusing on the bad and never focusing on the good. It's from a place of wanting to help, and without consent, it can go really haywire really fast. And then we have our nines, fives, and fours in the last triad. And they often like don't necessarily want to kick up a lot of, stress or things. So sometimes it can feel easy to just assume people aren't going to want what you have to offer, so to not offer it at all. um but there's also these other things like the type 5, my goodness, like if they have something that they feel like is their expertise, can just jump in and launch in and go deep without you even realizing it. So that's like a place to check in around consent. Like fives often they want to be asked. They want to be asked like if you can come toward them because they're protective of their energy. And so they often will offer that to other people, unless it is that thing that is their expertise. And then they just can fire hose everyone with it, which can be a source of disconnection. Um, fours might have some issues as well, thinking that if someone doesn't have the capacity, if they ask for consent to share and someone doesn't have the capacity, that is a rejection of them. Not realizing that everyone can't go deep with them every single time, and that not having capacity is not the same as you being rejected or you not being loved or you not being cared for. And then nines, when they want to keep peace, they can just kind of sit back, maybe not offer anything, or consent is easy because they might assume you're going to say no. Or that's the way that they kind of show up to make sure that things aren't too jarring. But then also, if they want to be heard, they can just like with fire, kind of just tell you everything that they feel like you need to hear. And so we each have our own tricky relationships with consent, with the reasons that we may feel really comfortable with consent, or we may feel like there are some serious barriers to a practice or an ethic of consent. And they're all worth checking in with ourselves, all of them. Because, part of what we want to do is we want to become more emotionally intelligent. We want to be people who are able to read what's happening with others, but also get really curious instead of just drawing a conclusion or making an assumption. We get to notice and then practice curiosity with people. And that curiosity with people often leads to deeper connection. And that's one of the opportunities of consent. So it is something that I will keep beating on my drum about. I will keep banging the horn, and that's not sorry. I take that back. I don't think that's the right phrase. Blaring the horn. I will keep talking about this because it is important. It is important that we honor people's agency and their own autonomy and their own right to say yes or no thank you or not right now. Can you talk? Can you swing back later? Can you circle back? Can you circle back on that? Maybe in 5 minutes, maybe in 10 minutes. Maybe someone's heart is really tender and anything that you have to offer is going to put them into a shame spiral. People get to be honored for where they are, not where you hope they are. So, that's just a little bit about consent. How do you feel about it? Head over to my Instagram at the Anti-Racist Enneagram and tell me what you're thinking about this whole consent thing. Send me a DM. I want to know, what is your experience and what are your hangups? What are your concerns? Yeah, I want to hear all about it. All right. From love and for liberation. Peace out.
Not trying to get by.